Game over, man. Game over.
Johnny. You're gonna need a bigger boat. So simple.
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the InSession Film Podcast.
Well, welcome to episode 584 for May 6, 2024, and I'm JD Duran.
And I'm Brendan Cassidy.
Hey, thanks for joining us, everybody, as we swing into the summer movie season. It is here already. It is hard to believe.
I like how you said swinging into the summer movie season as if you're still not riding the high of seeing Spider-Man 2 in theaters.
Yep, absolutely. A religious experience, as I talked about last week.
Yeah.
And that was quite incredible.
It's going to be your number one film of the year, isn't it?
Maybe. I think we're on the verge, though, of getting a report any second now that Sam Raimi has been tapped to do Spider-Man 4. I feel like that's going to happen.
The people want it. I think we're going to see that quite often for a lot of these blockbusters from 20 years ago or so. I think we're going to see an announcement of The Mummy 4 with Brendan Fraser and Rachel Weisz coming back. I think that's going to happen. But I'm with you. I think the most likely candidate is Spider-Man 4 from Sam Raimi. Mm-hmm. And no, not with Tom Holland and Zendaya. I think that'll be someone else helming that. I'm saying Tobey Maguire and Kirsten Dunst. I think that's going to happen.
No, there's certainly, I think, plenty of salivation for it.
Yeah.
And given the state of modern filmmaking, the modern blockbusters as it is now, if we're going to eat up all of this nostalgia and IP, like, you might as well give Sam Raimi a fourth film. And
give him a blank check. Give him a blank check. I would love to see it in the vein of Spider-Man 2. How awesome would that be if he is able to do that and it ends up being the second best Spider-Man film in his 4-film arc? That would be
incredible.
Amazing. Yeah.
I would not be surprised at all if that's how it played out.
Yeah.
I do love me some Sam Raimi, and I think him getting an opportunity to do a Spider-Man 4, because the initial blueprint that was laid out seemed interesting enough.
Yeah, it did.
Was really fascinating, and then they obviously pulled the plug on it.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's what they would bring back if they were to do a Spider-Man 4, but
correct me if I'm wrong, because his Spider-Man 4 was meant to include Vulture, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I don't think they would do that, given, say what you will about the Tom Holland Spider-Man films, Michael Keaton as Adrian Toomes / Vulture made an impact. And I feel like bringing Vulture back would just be too much room for comparison, regardless of how well it's done. I don't know. I feel like given the length of time between Spider-Man 3 and now, Sam Raimi, I would almost assume, would take that opportunity to just retool it in a way where his mental and emotional headspace is at this point. I expect that, at least.
I mean, I think those are valid points. At the same time, Raimi's Spider-Man movies obviously exist in a completely different universe and in a different space.
They do, yeah.
Where many of the characters introduced throughout those first three Spider-Mans, we've already seen other iterations of, including a Tom Hardy Venom.
Mm-hmm.
So there's going to be a level of crossover regardless.
Yeah.
I say let Sam Raimi do what he wants. If he wants to do a movie that involves characters that we've seen in the Sony MCU timeline, I'm fine.
Yeah,
that's okay with me. By all means, let Sam Raimi be Sam Raimi.
Yeah, if anything, I feel like that was my assumption. There was really more from, let's say, a Sony perspective, and them, getting their grubby hands into this once again, which I hope doesn't happen. I want to see it. I want to see a Sam Raimi production if he's coming back for Spider-Man 4.
I agree. I think that would be fascinating. So we'll see how any of that turns out. But
with Danny Elfman coming back to do the score, that is important. That is
very important.
That was such a crucial point that was also missing in Spider-Man 3. We often don't talk about that. The score for Spider-Man 3 isn't terrible, by Christoph Beck, I believe it was. But it really was missing some
Mrs.
type of
Elfman,
some
sure.
type of musical ethos that made those first two films so
Man,
iconic.
I agree. I mean, that was a big part of what I've dubbed the religious experience for me. I mean, obviously getting to experience that film in theaters, which is, for all intents and purposes, as cinephiles, it's a place of worship.
Yeah.
And
it's a
getting
church.
to take my son to church, if you will, and getting to experience that film was special for all the reasons I mentioned last week. It was very moving, but a big part of what I love about that film is the craft, and Elfman's score is obviously a huge part of it.
Yeah.
So good. And it's not just that opening theme, it's how he incorporates that throughout the film with everything else he's doing.
It's the love theme between Peter and Mary Jane as well, the way it crystallizes at the end. It is, I think when we reviewed the film or talked about it a little bit when we did our 2004 retrospective, I sort of called Spider-Man 2 a Technicolor romance in the of like the heyday of like Douglas Sirk movies and stuff like that. And musically, the cinematography from Bill Pope all kind of mirror that classic Hollywood Technicolor vibe. And that, like, just all of those components together just make it feel like such a Hollywood movie in the right way, in the best way. And it's something I really, really miss from, that day and age.
I agree. No, that was magical to get to experience. And it's incredible how, and I didn't really talk about this too much last week because I wanted to emphasize what it was like emotionally to have that experience with my son.
Right.
However, just simply in terms of the experience as a critic or even just as a cinephile, it's incredible how the craft of that film holds up immensely, especially in a theatrical setting when you incorporate the tangibility of it, the practical sets and the practical effects that Sam Raimi employs, and even the CGI. It's maybe a little wonky at times, but it's honestly still quite great.
It's integrated
very good.
It's integrated within things that do feel practical, that kind of give it this three-dimensional space to work in. It never feels like actors on like a soundstage surrounded by blue or green screens. It never feels that way. There is a three-dimensional quality to it without the film actually being, viewed in 3D. And it's the best thing I can say about it. It's a movie that was made at a time when, like, visual effects, the music, all these things that make a movie from the back end were properly budgeted for and timed for.
Yeah.
And that's not the case that we see sadly nowadays. But it's something that was definitely taken into consideration back then.
Yeah. And that's inspired some recent conversation and topics here on the show for sure.
Absolutely.
But wanted to reiterate that once again, because it really is fantastic. And the other thing that we didn't talk about last week, because again, we weren't reviewing Spider-Man 2, but
as much as we want to just talk about it all the time, this would be the Spider-Man 2 podcast.
I know. But, I think about the performances. Tobey Maguire and Kirsten Dunst, obviously fantastic in that film. But part of the emotional experience for me was the May scene, kind of near the end, or at least as we transition
there's a hero in all of us.
Oh my gosh. That was my initial reaction when walking out. I simply had to tweet that quote because I became undone. It was interesting because my son, Sam, knew that I had loved that scene because we've seen the films before. And it's so funny to me because as we had approached that scene, I could see his excitement kind of heightening, maybe more for me than anything else. Because I don't know if he understands the profundity of that moment.
Sure.
But he knows that I respond to it.
Yeah.
So,
and that's what he's in turn responding to.
Exactly.
It's an energy thing.
Absolutely. And I could see his energy, again, for me, kind of ramping up. And so I kind of grab his arm and, kind of see him smile there. And we witnessed that scene. And again, like, it's a magical moment in that film on its own terms. But then seeing Sam and his energy and his excitement for me and him just being there next to me in this moment, given everything that had preceded it, as I talked about last week, I was undone. Like that.
I wish I saw that. I wish I saw that.
Completely
It would have been
unglued.
one of the few times I would have allowed a camera in the movie theater, just to capture not to capture the movie, to capture the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just so good. And just an incredible performance. Honestly, and it's funny because we're in the middle of, or I guess at the beginning stages, but we've just started this Best Picture movie series, and Chasing the Gold has become a new thing for us this year with InSession Film in terms of priority. Yeah. If anyone's been to the website or even the podcast, there are new things happening. So awards has become a much bigger thing here at InSession Film. And I don't know if that's why my mind went there or not. I don't know. But another thought I had leaving that experience as well is that Rosemary Harris should have been nominated for an Oscar for that performance.
There's a lot of things that should have been nominated in that movie. And
for sure.
Probably one of them.
Absolutely one of them. She was the first one I went to, though, because it's not even just that moment. I would have nominated her for that scene alone. And that's such a classic Oscar moment where the camera is emphasizing you in this great medium shot, and she delivers this monologue that is so powerful.
It's in some ways it's the money shot for that performance.
Yeah. I think about Anatomy of a Fall, and everyone wanted to talk about the argument. Yeah. Like, like that's the scene, the classic Oscar clip scene. Yeah.
But you go to the scene in the car as more of an
exactly.
Yeah.
So that's the analogy I wanted to bring up here, because yes, the speech would be the Oscar clip. And honestly, I think that's more deserving than the argument scene in Anatomy of a Fall. However, if I wanted to continue the analogy, if I wanted to pick a different scene from Spider-Man 2 as the Oscar clip, as I argued for Anatomy of a Fall, I would maybe go to the moment her reaction to Peter telling her the truth.
I was just going to say the wordlessness of it.
The subtlety of that moment is so incredible.
And credit to a film like that commits to its animosity, right? That could have easily been a moment of immediate forgiveness, and it's not. It's not. It's a rift. It's an earned, well-deserved rift. And I love that it commits that and doesn't shy away from it.
And that rift is partially what gives weight to her monologue near the end.
Oh, it
when
sets
she gives
it up
that
perfectly.
Speech.
Yeah, it sets it up.
Absolutely. So
it's also a very funny performance too. Let's not forget, shame on you. Yeah. it's so a very funny performance. I mean, although admittedly her swinging around on top of the, the buildings with Doc Ock a little bit.
Exaggerated.
It's a little silly, but it is a Sam Raimi movie. You kind of have to expect that every now and then.
Yeah. But like to your point about the humor, the shame on you moment was great, but I also love the she's hanging, with the umbrella or whatever she's holding, her cane. I can't remember what it is, but she's got her umbrella there on the window. Yeah. And she falls down, or she's about to fall down. And then there's the trick that, there's like a ledge there. So she wasn't.
Oh, and she sees the statue of an angel.
She sees the statue. It's so good. Like the little thank you to this. Like it's so
that's
part of the ethos.
That's such a smart Sam Raimi touch, because he knows that he's working with something so silly and so unrealistic. You have to find a way to ground it. And sometimes the best thing to do is ground it in humor.
Absolutely.
That's what he does.
And you need a performer to make that work. And man, she nails it. She absolutely nails it. Because like the thank you could also come off as tacky or perhaps a little out of place given the dramatic stakes of the scene. But I think she makes it work seamlessly.
Kind of does, but that's kind of what doesn't cross the line too much that it becomes out of place. It still works within the context of it.
I think because of her performance. Maybe on the page it feels a little weird.
On the page it's very out of context, but she makes it work.
Yeah, it's so good.
Yeah.
Anyway,
well, there's our
unofficial
review of Spider-Man 2.
But it's the summer movie season, so you can't help yourself. You're very excited. Lots of things happening.
Yeah.
Tomorrow night, in fact, by the time this episode goes live, I might actually be at the theater watching the new Apes movie.
Oh.
And recently, you and I have talked about this recent Planet of the Apes trilogy. We did a whole VIP bonus content a few weeks ago. If
we did.
anyone wants to go and check that out, where we talk about that trilogy and how great that it is. And you and I have shared some dubiousness as far as the marketing for this new one goes. And we haven't really talked about it here on the show yet. I guess maybe we can quickly do that. Now, the reason I bring it up here, not only are we getting that very soon, obviously, but the reactions from its premiere were very surprising. Very, very surprising.
Yeah.
Where a lot of people were raving about the film in terms of its emotion and performances, but even visually, I was a little stunned by some of the heavy praise that it was getting. So I don't know what to make of that, because obviously there's always a level of hyperbole with these things, but
there is, and there's an excitement factor to it because these are the first people who are seeing it, right? So they're getting at it early, and when you're in that kind of environment, it tends to elicit positivity out of you. And not to say that it's not well deserved, but there are other factors that play into that. But there have been so many examples of this kind of praise for a summer movie, and it comes out, it's holding like a 35% on Metacritic or something like that. Like I remember this same type of response when Pirates of the Caribbean: Dead Men Tell No Tales come out. And everyone's saying, "Oh, it's the best one since the first one. It's the best one since the first one." It's like, no, it's not. It has one great scene, and the rest is not.
Yeah. So again, I don't know what to make of it. I'm not necessarily making any judgment on the film. Obviously, I haven't seen it. I'm certainly not making a judgment of any critics. I just found the initial reaction because it was very much against the grain of what we were anticipating.
Yeah.
And I think where the surprise really comes from is critics that I deeply admire and respect. Who
that's a
are
good point.
A little bit more objective, who are not shells for studio praise simply because they have this access. They'll be honest.
They're not clickbait critics, as I sometimes call them.
Exactly. They're honest. They're not afraid to tell you what they think. If it's something that's not good, they will tweet that. That will be their initial reaction.
Sure.
And it's those critics who were more or less raving about this film. So to me, that's where the surprise came from more than anything else.
And we've seen this happen before, where filmmakers who we see some promise in, but don't really feel the urge to give them a full pass yet. Someone like Wes Ball, for instance, because the Maze Runner films are whatever for me. I think they're certainly better than, let's say, Divergent, something like that. But I think that first Maze Runner is pretty good. The other two are pretty forgettable. But I never really thought of Wes Ball as someone that would gravitate my interest. But we've seen this before. We've seen filmmakers start off in a similar way. All of a sudden they get to their third, fourth film. It's like, wait, we should have been paying attention to this individual. We really should have been. And maybe this is that film for Wes Ball. Maybe this is in many ways the kind of like the unofficial debut of when we really need to start paying attention to him.
Yeah. And especially if the story is there, I think maybe that's my main thing. I don't necessarily disagree based off the trailers that it might be visually lesser than the Matt Reeves films. But as long as the apes are rendered well, and I hope I assume that's where the emphasis of the effects will be is on the ape characters. If the background comes off more Maze Runner-ish than perhaps what we got in the Matt Reeves films, I can maybe let that slide, especially if the story and character is there.
The emotion's there, because say what you will about, the visual effects in that original trilogy are very good. There are some dated components in Rise specifically. It does have a bit of a glossiness to it, but you also have an Andy Serkis making it work that it almost doesn't matter. And that's, to your point, if the visuals are not quite there, if there is an emotional resonance in the motion capture work, then that's going to pull us in. That's the thing that's going to pull us in.
No, I completely agree. Or I think of the deer and even the bear at the beginning.
And Dawn,
of Dawn.
it's not the greatest.
Not
no,
great.
It's not great. Yeah.
Not great.
Clearly, all the money went to other things, but they went to the right things.
Exactly. But like the Caesar of it all, the Koba of it all, that part is great. That's where the money went. So if that means other things slide, okay, that's fine. I can live with that. Especially when you look at like the moment. I forget the kid and Dawn, the son of
Rocket. Is it Ash?
No. The human teenager.
Oh, the one played by Cody
character's
Smith
name.
McPhee. Yeah, I forget the character.
I forget
name,
the character's
Cody,
name.
Cody Smith McPhee's character.
Yes, but that moment of him and Maurice going through the books.
Oh, that's amazing.
You can't. I wouldn't have known that was CGI if he didn't. He was sitting next to a real orangutan for all I know. I say that facetiously, but it's so good.
Convince me.
It's very convincing. Absolutely. So the money went to where it needed to in order for that film to be effective. So certain things slide. Same thing in war. Like there are certain things slide, but the money is on the screen where it counts, and that's really all that I'm asking here.
Absolutely. And I'm with you.
Maybe Westball does deliver. We'll find out soon enough.
There was an interview with Westball where he was asked to rank the 3 films, the 3 in the trilogy that he's following up on. God. He just immediately said Dawn. He just immediately just went right to Dawn. And he said he kind of straddles the line between War and Rise being second and third place respectively. So he's got, I'm not going to say he's got the right taste, but he definitely seems to share our opinion because I feel like you and I are in the same boat. We tend to rank it in that same way.
Yeah, but to reiterate something I tweeted out over the weekend, I don't think War is that far behind.
It doesn't really matter. It doesn't really matter.
Quite masterful in its own right. I love Rise. I've defended Rise quite heavily on the show.
It's a very good movie.
Social media.
It's a very good movie.
It is really great. It sets the table very well. I believe we talked about this a few weeks ago as well. But I do think it is clearly the third of the 3. Like it's not even close. But it's still very good. Yeah. Like I would probably still put that, 4 out of 5 on Letterboxd. Like I love that film. I think as a trilogy, all 3 are quite great. So that's not to diminish Rise.
No,
it's more so to heighten Dawn and War, which I think are absolutely masterful.
Whatever happened to Rupert Wyatt, who directed Rise?
Who knows? I don't know. That's a great question.
We did talk about The Gambler with Mark Wahlberg. Remember that movie? He directed that. I do
remember that.
That was a terrible movie, if you ask me.
I don't know. Have we talked about anything else that he's done since then?
He did direct a movie called Captive State, a sci-fi thriller, dystopian kind of thing that I did see, and it was I thought it was okay. It was certainly better than The Gambler, in my opinion.
Gotcha. I do not believe I saw that film.
I have heard good things about his earlier film, The Escapist, but I haven't seen it. So up until this point of those major works, Rise of the Planet of the Apes is the one I probably like the most.
Yeah, so he's only done a few films since Rise. That to me is surprising. Like I don't know the circumstances. Maybe there was some life stuff that got in the way.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know.
Like I just kind of wonder because Rise is a very good movie. Unless it just maybe it bombed at the box office. I honestly don't remember.
Well, there's that, or it might also be that we associate Matt Reeves more often with this trilogy than we probably should be. And maybe that's part of it because he made the final 2 that really left a certain imprint that really turned it into the trilogy that it was. And of course, he's still top of mind with the Batman. So I think, if anything, Matt Reeves might just be inadvertently hogging the spotlight. Not that he's trying
to. But my question is, why hasn't he been working since then?
I don't know.
Which is why I pose it that way.
Sure.
You're right. I mean, Matt Reeves is obviously going to steal the spotlight when it comes to that trilogy.
Yeah.
My question was, like, why hasn't he been, like, surely the studios would have hired him for something else.
I don't know.
But it's just weird that since then he's had to do, like, these 2 smaller little films. Mm-hmm. And that's it. That's all he's done since then. Mm-hmm. I don't know. It's just a little strange, but
yeah, it's unfortunate because he directed a good first outing in that trilogy.
Yeah, But yeah, no, I think War is every bit as good as Dawn. I think it's quite good. And Michael Giacchino's score is stupid. It is unbelievably good.
It's a character in that movie.
Incredible.
You know it's a character when it replaces the 20th Century Fox logo that opens up the movie.
It's so ridiculous. And we talked about it in that VIP bonus content a few weeks ago, but it's stuck in my mind since revisiting the film and had to tweet it out. But like that moment you see between the gorilla and that little girl there, Luca, I believe is the girl's name.
Nova, I think they call her. Yeah.
Man, just a stunner of a scene. An absolutely beautiful, gorgeous moment that this is ultimately a war movie, but in the midst of the action and all of the stakes that we see are these incredible, gorgeous little moments that you get like that. It's just so incredible. And how that flower comes back later on in the film, just devastating. Just, so good.
Yeah,
Anyway,
good visual storytelling, good trilogy, good movies.
Anyway, we'll get more into the summer season as we go. We
have other topics here. We're a little behind right now.
Did not anticipate us opening the show this way, but here we are. We are continuing our Best Picture movie series this week as we talk about John Ford's 1941 film, How Green Was My Valley? We'll get to that in the back half of the show, but looking forward to continuing that series.
Yeah.
First, though, before we get to that, or I guess I should say second, because we just had a whole segment there.
This is like topic number 7 right now at this point. I know.
I want to talk about the box office for The Fall Guy, because that was a massive talking point over the weekend. People claiming that it's a failure. The studios are suffering. Movies are dying. It is the end of the world as we know it. And then there's the other side where people are like, chill, calm down. It's fine. These things happen.
Yeah.
So, Brendan, with The Fall Guy rendering, I believe at this point here, hold on, let me make sure I get my facts straight because I do have this pulled up. At this point, it only grossed $27.7 million domestically on 4,000 screens, which that's a lot of screens.
That is a lot of screens. I think we're at like just over 65 million worldwide at this point.
According to this, I'm looking at, is 64.4.
Okay.
Worldwide.
Gotcha.
So, and the budget for it was 65.4 million. Or no, it was 125. Sorry, 125. I had those numbers backwards.
Yeah.
125. So it has a long way to go.
It does.
To make back its money, let alone gross any revenue.
Yeah.
So where do we begin here?
Oh, there's a lot to talk about here. To your point, though, I don't want to jump to any conclusions yet because we could see another Elemental-like situation here. The Fall Guy is the kind of movie that I could see being a box office hit. It just has that kind of charm to it. And whether you like the movie or not, that's kind of beside the point. You can dislike a movie and still recognize it could be a potential hit with people financially, whatever. It's just that kind of movie. And I think The Fall Guy does sort of fit into that category. If anything, I think this is more of a conversation of how you properly finance and budget your movie to actually be successful. I forget who it was on Twitter, but they made the comparison to the money that Bullet Train, David Leitch's last film, actually made, which I think was like close to 200 million or something like that. Maybe it was even a little bit more than that. But that was a movie that was budgeted way less than The Fall Guy. So even if The Fall Guy makes the same amount as Bullet Train did, Bullet Train is considered more of a success because of that ratio between budget to box office.
$239 million worldwide.
For Bullet Train. Okay.
For Bullet Train.
And I don't think that number is necessarily out of the realm of possibility for The Fall Guy. Like if word of mouth takes over, the movie can make that.
And can I also bring in this context as well?
Yeah.
For Bullet Train, the domestic opening for that, only 30 million.
See? There you go. So that could be a similar situation. That's and maybe we are making a bit of a logical comparison here.
Yeah,
but
went
the
on
point
to gross 103 domestically over its run.
Yeah, the point I'm making is that was an I don't want to say easier, but that was a more successful example because of the budgetary restriction that Bullet Train had. That was budgeted way less than the Fall Guy. So if the Fall Guy makes that same amount box office wise, it's not as much of a success because that's $120 to $130 million budget that it's working with. So really the issue that I think we need to talk about is how studios are overspending on marketing efforts and whether those efforts are really working or if they really are effective. I think part of the thing here with the Fall Guy is that it had a very successful run at South by Southwest, I think it was. But that was back in March. I honestly feel like there was a bit of a lull between the hype for this movie. There was kind of a moment where I felt like, okay, we're starting to forget about it. And then the movie comes out. I think the timing of how it was structured from a release standpoint, from a marketing standpoint, maybe didn't do the film enough favors to really carry that momentum and maintain it as best as it could have. And I think that may have had something to do with it. I think if anything, it's where that money from a budgetary standpoint is ultimately going. And I'm not sure if it was as well allocated as it should have been. So if anything, that might be part of it. Because I think this is the kind of movie that on paper should be successful. Like this should be a success. And maybe it will be. Maybe word of mouth will carry it. I'm just not sure if the allocation of funds was properly there. There was something miscalculated here. I'm not sure what it is, but I'm trying to let my analytical financial brain kind of like look at the variables and look at the scenarios here that could be causing this. And I could be way off base. I don't know, but I'm wondering about that allocation of budgetary funds that may have led to something that was sadly unforeseen. But I don't know. Maybe in a couple weeks we'll be, eating all of these words.
Perhaps. I do hope so. My initial thought when people started having this conversation was that it could very much have an Elemental type run. Yeah. And that is perhaps now compounded by Bullet Train. And I didn't even have that context in mind, but we all panicked with Elemental and then it went on to have this massive run. So yeah, the Fall Guy could very much have that same type of run because it is a movie that is to be seen in theaters. The word of mouth could absolutely light a fire for the film. And I really do hope that is the case. I do agree to some extent that there was a miscalculation. Where that is, though, I don't know because I thought the marketing was excellent. I thought it was fantastic. The marketing, as far as I'm concerned, nailed it. Okay. They did a great job of promoting these stunt guys everywhere they went. They pulled out all the stops to have all of these stunt like choreographed things at all these events. Ryan Gosling and Emily Blunt out there promoting the living hell out of this movie for weeks now. I think the marketing and putting that money into actual stunt work inside the marketing, I thought was genius. And I thought it was fun. It was very exciting. Where I would push back on the South by Southwest thing, you and I are in this world and yes, we pay attention to those things. The average person simply does not. They might not even know that the film festival even exists. Sadly, that could be true if you were to interview 9 out of 10, or 10 random strangers out on the street. 9 out of 10 of them might not even know what South by is. So I don't know how much that matters in terms of getting the movie to 100 million, 500 million. That's where this broad strokes marketing has to hit. And I thought it did a great job. However, I do wonder if there's a level of how this film feels to the average person that connects in their mind, oh, this movie is for me to watch at home and on Netflix.
I think that's part of it. I think that's part of it.
I kind of wonder if streaming is the major culprit here. And maybe it's the Ryan Gosling of it all. I don't know, because you think of The Gray Man that came out a few years ago. And while the film world was not a huge fan of it, it was a decent enough hit for Netflix at the time. And I just kind of wonder if the studios have conditioned audiences so effectively, especially when so many of these movies go straight to VOD or streaming almost immediately after they released. You know, another film that was brought up over the weekend was The Beekeeper, because The Beekeeper made something like $170 million at the box office this year as well, which is why it is a little bit of a roll of the dice. Some films hit, some don't. What the cause may be, like, I don't know. Like, why does The Beekeeper make $170 million is that just the Jason Statham of it all? Well, I don't know.
Because I don't think we associate Jason Statham movies with streaming just yet. But Ryan Gosling, you make a great point there, and I know a lot of other people have made this point. Ryan Gosling has been in a string of action movies that may have been direct-to-streaming-esque. So people may have had that perspective that The Fall Guy feels like another one of those type of movies. Maybe they saw it that way.
But even The Beekeeper went to premium VOD like a month after it was released. So it's been on Amazon forever.
Yeah.
Basically since it came out.
Yeah.
You know, because that's the world we live in now. And while I am not willing to shell out $20 for a movie, I'm sure a lot of people are. And
you have like 4 people living at home. It saves money than going to the theater. You can just make popcorn yourself and have
exactly. You save a ton of money. A ton of money, absolutely. And maybe as Sam gets a little bit older, or if there's a movie that our family wants to watch, like, and it's not just me watching a movie for $20, but everybody collectively.
Well, then you're creating value for that, right? That's the thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think maybe that is a big part of the machinations here, is that, hey, that looks great, but I'd rather just watch that at home on Netflix. When is that coming out on Netflix? And that's the mentality that people have, especially because it is expensive to go to the theaters. Yeah. But it's there, and there's something about that juxtaposition that is fascinating and heartbreaking all at the same time, because I think the marketing did a great job of portraying that this is a movie to be seen in theaters. The critics and their reviews, their scores for the film seem to reverberate that as well. And there's been good word of mouth since it came out. It just screams like this is a box office hit. And to this point, we just haven't seen that quite yet. And I can't, you might be right that there's something in the marketing that was the problem. I don't know. All I know is I loved it. I thought they nailed it. But I'm also one that's going to go to the theater to see this anyway.
Well, yeah.
So it's hard for me to say.
Let me also add a little bit more context to my comments around the film's marketing, because I don't want that to be perceived as I thought the marketing was bad. I actually don't necessarily think the marketing was bad. I thought the trailers were okay. I thought they were fine. But I'm with you that the utilization of real stuntmen on the red carpet and them actually doing stunts to promote the movie on the red carpet, that was brilliant. I thought Ryan Gosling showing up once again as Beavis was really funny for a moment as well. Those little things, that was brilliant stuff. But I do bring up this question, and I bring it up as a legit question. I don't know the answer. I'm not saying that this was the case. I'm genuinely curious. Did enough normal people see that marketing, see those efforts promoting it in that way?
It's a good question. It's a good question. I don't know.
I wonder, again, more, not even a hypothesis. It really is a genuine question. I wonder if that was just a little too underseen, because I think that's a really good way to promote a movie like this.
And it also circles back to perhaps one of the fundamental questions of the internet. Is the internet, which we know I already know the answer to this, but I'm going to pose it again.
Let's be, yeah.
Is the internet representative of real life because
The machines want us to think so.
the machines want us to think so, absolutely. Because all of those marketing things went super viral on social media. They were everywhere. You could not escape it. They were viral.
Yeah.
So if you are active on Facebook and I assume Instagram, I didn't see them on Instagram, but I'm not on that.
Probably
app
more
as
so on
much.
TikTok than anything else.
TikTok, Twitter, especially.
Yeah.
Like it was viral on those platforms. So absolutely, to answer your question, people did see it there. But again, is that real life? And the answer to that really is no, obviously.
Yeah.
But like, is it enough? Like, are there enough eyeballs there though to still get the film to, let's say, 50 million or 100 million?
It's not even are there enough eyeballs? Are the right eyeballs on that?
Yeah.
Is it a proper diversification of eyeballs? Because you'll have a certain demographic seeing the marketing from that platform, but then you might want to try and cater to a different demographic who might only be seeing this promoted in the morning on television when someone does a live talk show or something like that promoting it. So like how do you straddle that a little bit? And maybe there was a component missing somewhere.
And here's another question that I have for you as well, and to everybody listening. Did Ryan Gosling's performance or even being associated with Barbie actually hurt him in this case? Now, let me explain why I asked that question.
It's an interesting question.
Because there is a group of people out there that did not respond to Barbie because of, let's say, its portrayal of masculinity. Now, we've talked to death about why the masculinity in Barbie is actually quite great. I love the way the film explores it. However, there's a group of people that did not respond to the film. They didn't love that about it. And I kind of wonder, I'm trying not to paint with broad strokes, but I am. I wonder if those same people are the same people that would appeal themselves to a Fall Guy kind of movie. It's this fun action comedy. That's the kind of stuff that I love, but it stars Ryan Gosling. And look, I just did not like what he did in Barbie. So I'm not on his wavelength right now. So I'm not seeing that.
It is so difficult for me to say that we live in an agenda-driven society right now, but we live in an agenda-driven society right now. If that played a part of it in some way, all I'll say is I wouldn't be surprised. I don't know if I would place my money on that being a major factor because my optimistic side just wants to say that's a loud vocal minority saying those
and maybe
things.
That's it. That very well could be true. I hope that it is true.
But if it wasn't, again, I wouldn't be all that surprised, which is a very tragic thing to say nonetheless.
I agree. Look, I just wanted to pose the question because
it's a fair question.
I see a world where those two demographics are one and the same. I don't know to what percentage. I don't know how much of an impact that would have, if any. But something that came to mind.
It is something to think about. Yeah, because those voices who may be singing that tune that you're talking about, some of them probably do have an influence. Not even probably. Some of them definitely do. Now, granted, I thankfully haven't really seen that at all. I haven't really seen that conversation being had by certain people who are saying, oh, I hated what happened in the Barbie movie, so I can't support Ryan Gosling right now, so I'm not going to see this movie, The Fall Guy specifically. I haven't heard that, and maybe
I haven't either. I haven't either.
Yeah,
I'm just throwing that out there.
Maybe it's happening, and I'm just not seeing it. But if I'm glad I'm not seeing it because I don't need another reason to get angry at society right now.
Like I'm just not. Again, I say that at the risk of sounding myopic because I'm not in those circles either.
Right.
But given, let's say, certain social political ethos is that make up America, I would not be surprised if a certain segment of the population decided I'm anti Ryan Gosling because of what he portrayed in this Barbie movie, and I just don't want anything to do with him right now.
Put it this way, I'm sure there are people saying that. It just depends on what people are saying, man.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think
it's a fair question. I think it's a fair question to ask that you're posing there.
Yeah. I think the main culprit, though, is streaming.
I do think that plays a part.
I think that's honestly the big part. Because I could see, while I don't agree with this personally, I do understand why many would see the trailers for that or even the idea of it and go, yeah, I'll just wait for that to hit Netflix. That feels like a Netflix viewing for me. It saddens my heart that that's the case, but I do see, or at least I understand, because that's how audiences have been conditioned now.
They have been. They have been. I think we're slowly moving away from that, but I think the Fall Guy just happens to find a certain level of comparison that it probably shouldn't have had. And that's again, that's no fault to anyone. It's no fault to anyone. It's, if anything, it's really fault to the studios for how they chose to release certain movies that conditioned audiences to think a certain way. But it's not the Fall Guy's fault. I agree. Yeah, it's no one in that regard. They did what they were supposed to do. But I still also wonder if there was some type of gap in the not even just the marketing, but where the budget was allocated for certain things that made the movie too expensive for its own good. Because like $135 million for a movie like this, or 125, whatever it may have been, that's the budget specifically. That's not a low budget. Like, that is a bit of a climb for for an original. I mean, it's not an original. It's based on a television show that most people probably don't know about in our current day and age. But it feels like a unique movie. It's not connected to any top of mind IP right now.
Yeah.
That's a decent budgetary number for a movie like this. At least I think it is. And it does make me wonder if the finances were allocated accordingly. I'm not really sure if anything could have been different there.
Yeah, I don't really know. I mean, there's obviously a lot of stunt work in the film. I imagine that's where a lot of the money went to in terms of the budget for the film itself. I don't know how much was allocated toward marketing here. Yeah. But either way, it's got a hill to climb. There's no doubt about that.
It does. Yeah.
And to your point about this being based off of previous IP, nobody knows about that TV show. This generation certainly doesn't. I don't think that even matters, though.
It doesn't.
It doesn't.
There's a lot of episodes.
Like this, it doesn't even matter.
A lot of episodes. I think it was almost 100 episodes when it aired in the 80s.
Sure. Yeah, for sure. But yeah, I mean, it markets itself as, at least I think it comes through in the trailer. But again, maybe doesn't come off this way.
It markets itself as its own thing.
Exactly, and as an ode to stunt work. So I don't know. Certainly something was missing there for sure. For the sake of moving on, though, there's at least one other thing I want to get to before we get to how green was my valley. I want to shout out friend of the show, Brian Rowe, who we love. Man.
I know where you're going with this. I love this man so much. And I don't just say this because he is a friend of the show and has represented us many times, but he is one of my favorite voices in all of modern film criticism right now. He really is.
I adore Brian. He's one of the best. I loved working with him last year as our awards editor. He was fantastic. Obviously, his YouTube channel has done extremely well. I'm very happy for him.
Yeah.
And to your point, Brendan, what's great about Brian is that his passion for film is infectious. He's very enthusiastic. He's very smart. And he's unafraid to champion his champions.
Yeah.
And that makes him one of the more unique voices out there, because admittedly, at times, I can perhaps fall victim to my own trepidations because
he's not afraid. He's not afraid.
You don't know how people are going to react on the internet, and if it's a polarizing film, you're going to get some backlash. And Brian is not afraid. And I do love that about him. And he sends out this tweet sometime last week about CODA being a film that he admires, that he loves.
Mm-hmm.
The internet, or at least some of the Twitter sphere anyway, did not take that very well. Did not take that very well.
Oh,
and look, let me be crystal clear on this, because I'm not trying to call out anyone specifically, or even the idea that CODA is a lesser Best Picture winner.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think there are movies of that year that were more deserving. I agree with that fundamental idea.
Absolutely.
I
absolutely
understand why people were upset, because there were much stronger movies that deserved the award. However, that's exactly why I have argued forever.
Soapbox? Soapbox, is it coming out again? Is it coming out?
You know it's coming.
It's coming.
Like, it's this whole, it took everything in me, because I'm not trying to call out certain individuals, and it was more than just a few. This was a lot of people.
Quite a few.
This was a lot of people, so I'm not, because I don't disagree that CODA wouldn't have won Best Picture. I wouldn't have voted for it. It wouldn't have even cracked a 10 for me.
Right.
But I really like the film a lot. And that's the thing about turning art into sports that drives me crazy, because we can't simply have a conversation about CODA being a good movie. And that's why I'm heartbroken for Brian, because he was not trying to say CODA is better than X movie. CODA deserved it over X movie. Like, he was not trying to say anything other than he loves CODA. He likes that film.
God forbid
he was doing.
God forbid you share a positive opinion on something. It's one thing if you share a negative opinion that people disagree on, but God forbid you share a positive opinion on something and you get nailed for it.
That's all he was doing. And he took a lot of grief simply by championing his champion. People lost their minds. Oh my gosh, CODA did not deserve it. It's terrible. Mm-hmm. There were tweets saying it's the worst Best Picture winner of all time. Like, those kind of lunatic level takes that are mind-blowing. Absolutely mind-blowing. Like, people lost their minds simply because Brian wanted to tweet about a movie that he loved from a pure place. That's all that it was. But honestly, we can't have that, because we've turned art into sports. And now we're angry that this film won. We can't talk about CODA in any positive light whatsoever. We can't have an honest and pure conversation about a film that is good. It is a good movie. It's very endearing.
It's fine. Yeah. I think it's pretty charming.
It has this emotional backbone. Like, it is very good. The performances are great. Troy Kotsur, amazing, deserving of his award as well. But we can't talk about the film from that perspective, because it won Best Picture. It won Screenplay. So now it's on this pedestal as this place for people to shoot at incessantly. And that's not what the Oscars are about.
I have a suggestion. Let's just end the Oscars. Let's just end the Oscars.
Well, and here's the thing. Like, I'm not anti-Oscars.
I know that.
Are good for many reasons. You think about the career opportunities people get. Moonlight winning Best Picture, what it does for a movie like that.
Sure.
The Oscars have a place. For me, it's less about the Oscars itself, although I would absolutely change a lot about how it works in the structure of it.
Right.
But for me, it's the conversation around the Oscars that is more problematic, because we are treating it, and
once
maybe
again, we got to shift the perspective once again. Shift the mindset.
Now, to be fair to the discourse as well, or at least those involved, the Oscars do not help themselves because they do make this into a highly competitive thing where artists are striving for these awards, and it's a marketing gimmick, right? That's part of the interesting thing about CODA winning, is that it's this small film, smaller comparatively to a lot of other studios and films with bigger budgets.
Yeah.
But like the smaller film, it premieres at Sundance. It was the very first film they premiered at Sundance that year. And it goes the distance. It goes wire to wire.
Yeah.
Very rare that happens. And there's something interesting about the film's evolution in that it puts a target on its back that people just do not like. And as part of that process, though, it becomes like, okay, who's got the most money? Who, what kind of things can we throw at it,
right,
in order to get, votes? So like, it is structured in a way that it is, honestly, it has this sports mentality to it.
Sure.
Weirdly. And so then it kind of, I don't want to say justifies, but it certainly complements the competitive spirit in terms of the conversation that ultimately people have around it. And, so like it's the structure of it isn't great fundamentally, but I still think even as it is, the reaction to it in terms of the conversation doesn't have to be rooted in, I love this movie, therefore I hate this one. Why? Why does it have to be that polarity every single time?
It only exists with the Oscars, too.
And it only exists with the Oscars.
Well, and to be fair, it is the most widely, not necessarily widely televised, but widely marketed award show. And it has a certain level of prestige that other award shows just don't have, because there is admittedly kind of a hierarchy with them. And when a movie wins an Oscar for Best Picture as opposed to something else, we only talk about the Oscar win. So like, is that why the Oscars have such a competitive nature, or perceived competitive nature, because it is just the most widely seen award show and the most widely quote unquote regarded award show? Should the perspective change to kind of mitigate this hierarchy in a way?
Yeah.
Because award shows happen. We should not get rid of award shows for these movies. We need to celebrate art in the right way. But when the SAG Awards happen, when the Critics' Choice happen, yes, there's a competitive nature to it, but everything still feels very celebratory. How do we find ourselves in a similar mindset with the Academy Awards? Is there even a solution to that that's able to, or is this just the people projecting their own arrogance to the Academy Awards? Like, where's the root cause of this? I always think about that, but it is nonetheless unfortunate that all you have to do is tweet about a movie you kind of liked, or even really liked, that just happened to win Best Picture, and it's a widely disagreed upon Best Picture winner among many people. And that's a problem. That's a problem.
Look, I think it proves more than anything else that people love sports. Whether you think you love sports or you don't.
We are a sports culture, a sports country. We really are.
Yeah. And I just love the irony, because so many of these people inside the film world anyway perhaps come from more of a background of the arts and musical theater and that sort of a thing, and they don't necessarily watch sports. Now, obviously, there's a ton of crossover. You and I know a lot of people in the film space that are huge sports fans.
Absolutely.
Because, as you just pointed out, our country is absolutely run by sports in many respects.
It is.
So it's
even if it's not an actual sport, it's still a sport.
It's still a sport.
Corporate America is a sport. Politics is a sport. It's a sport.
Well, and the thing is, like, people are passionate about what they're passionate about, and that's what this comes down to. It's why sports is what it is. I love this team. I bleed this team. So when they lose, I'm devastated. It affects my day when they lose. There are real reactions real heartbreak.
Yeah.
And on the other side, as I experienced back in January, true, utter, almost hard to articulate elation when you win, which is more rare, right?
Yeah.
So that's what makes sports great. And I think the same thing comes with film. Like, there are people that love their movies, love their favorite movies. And when it doesn't win, it's devastation. It's heartbreak. Well, okay. What won? CODA won?
Why?
Nope.
Am I the only one that just gets most excited to hear the nominations, and then I'm no longer excited for the Academy Awards?
Honestly, like, I've joked about it for years. We've made a T-shirt about it.
Yeah.
But in all sincerity, removing all joking about it, La La Land losing was one of the biggest highlights of the InSession Film era for me. Honestly. And truly. That film was under an intense microscope. And if it would have won, it could be the most hated film of all time. It was extreme, the divisiveness around.
If that were the case,
award
we
season.
probably would never have gotten First Man or Babylon if that ended up happening.
I don't know. It's hard to say, but that film losing removes the sights, removes the microscope, and I'm sure it's out there a little bit, but mostly nobody talks about La La Land anymore. And if they do, it's certainly not nearly the heated discourse it was in 2016. Like, people just don't care anymore because Moonlight won. The film they wanted to win won.
Right.
And it's why every year, my favorite films, I pray to all the gods, all of them, that it loses, or it maybe even isn't even nominated for Best Picture. Maybe I hope for a nomination, but not to win.
Unless it's an Oppenheimer or a Parasite.
Yeah.
There are certain situations where there's just a there's almost like this uniformity to whether those those movies winning created some type of event, some type of impact.
Yeah.
Like Oppenheimer winning Best Picture at the Academy Awards this year. That was a huge moment. And that's a moment that I don't think most people would be upset about.
Exactly.
Like there are exceptions to that comment, but for the most part, I'm more or less with you.
Like Parasite winning, everyone loved that. You're right. Yeah. There are certain exceptions to the rule for sure. But a lot of the time when it comes to my favorite films of the year, unless it falls within that exception, I simply hope to God that it does not come close. You know,
that's
it's
fair.
like I'm perfectly fine with After Sun never being in the conversation. Paul Mescal
because
getting a nomination is amazing.
Then it becomes your movie. It's like, it's mine. I can hold it close to the chest.
Yeah,
I can
like
show
Midnight Special, don't have to worry about it. You know, like, you know, and
I don't even think critics saw that movie sometimes.
Yeah. And I'm not choosing films to avoid the Oscars. Obviously, I had Oppenheimer as my favorite film of last year. Parasite was in my top 2 or 3 the year it came out. So, like, there are times I am with the consensus and with the Academy for sure. There's no doubt about it. But I mean, like, I've the last 2 years, I feel like 6 of the 10 nominees were also in my top 10. So it's not as if the Academy
better.
and I have there's been a weird alignment, which historically hasn't been the case, but the last few years there has been.
It's been more aligned with a lot of critics, I think, as of late than it has been, let's say, in the late 2000s to early 2010s, right?
Yeah.
I would say there was definitely more of a there definitely wasn't that alignment in that period for sure. Unless you're The Social Network. I mean, I think that film, everyone agreed, was one of, if not the best film of that year, and that almost won Best Picture, but it didn't. But it was The King's Speech. So now I'm going to go out there and
film
tweet
with a target on it.
Now I'm going to go out there and tweet and say I love The King's Speech and see what happens. Which, ironically,
you will also get destroyed. Like,
I should clarify.
And again,
that's just an experiment. I don't love that movie. I actually don't really care for that movie.
And like, I don't like The King's Speech, but here's the thing: if Brian or someone else made the exact same statement, I love the King's Speech. It was great for X, Y, and Z. I loved it. I'm sorry. I'm not going to quote tweet that person and be like, this is bullshit. Like, I just don't have that in me. Like, I just don't understand them. Like, let that person have their thing. Like, I don't agree with it, but I'm not going to attack the person because they think the King's Speech is great. Like, I don't understand.
By the way,
that at
JD,
all.
I see what you're doing. Are you getting this conversation out of the way so we don't talk about the Citizen Kane and how green was my valley of it all?
It's part of my opening thought. Look, it's built into my opening thoughts, so don't worry. But yes, partially setting the table here.
I figured. I'm sensing a theme of brewing.
There is a theme of brewing. There's a reason I wanted to bring it up. Look, all I'm asking is, like, I'm not saying you can't have that opinion. I agree. CODA was not my pick for Best Picture. I wouldn't have had it in a 10, personally. But I do really like the film. I agree with Brian. It's good. I really like it. I think I had it like in number 19 on my list. Like, I really like the film a lot.
Yeah, you liked it more than I did, but I still thought it was cute. I thought it was charming. I really did.
Yeah, and look, there are some Best Picture winners or nominees that I don't think are good. Like, you can have that opinion, and we can have a debate, especially if I ask for it.
Yeah,
Brian wasn't
he didn't
invoking any of that, though.
No.
Like, he was just saying, this is a movie that I love.
Yeah.
But people did not like. They really do not like that film. And again, I posed the question: do they really not like the film on its own terms, or do they just really hate it because it won? Because I think it's way more the latter than the
I
former.
want to see a hypothetical world or a new alternate timeline where CODA exists but doesn't have a single Oscar nomination for anything. How does the narrative change? Do people fight for it as, oh, this is my movie, no one talked about this?
Yeah, I think that's exactly what would happen.
I think it does change a little bit.
I think it changes drastically.
Yeah.
Absolutely. At any rate, we do need to get to our Best Picture movie series real fast, though. I do want to say quickly, rest in peace, Bernard Hill. There was the news that he recently passed away. And, wanted to take a second to highlight him because he was always magnetic on screen. You think of Titanic and Lord of the Rings most prominently.
Oh, sure.
But yeah, his work in those films and everything that he was in. Just a terrific actor that will be missed for sure.
I always wanted to give him a hug. He was such a huggable actor, which is a weird thing to say, but arguably one of the top 3 best performances in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. I think you can make that argument. I think he's that good in it. Even trying to veer off the beaten path, because most people will associate him with Lord of the Rings and Titanic for sure.
Yeah.
But I think of him in a movie like Wimbledon, which is a movie I don't really necessarily love, but I think he's great in that. The Scorpion King with The Rock, one of his first movies, I think he's really good in that too. So there are a few things here and there that might not be career-defining roles, but we say this a lot when actors were not just versatile, but they were able to, I guess, elevate sometimes trashy material into something a little bit more watchable and something with substance. And he was certainly another one of those examples.
Absolutely. And I haven't seen, some of the things he's been in, but the movies of his I have been in, I feel like I recognize his face in that film immediately.
All the time.
He has just this memorable presence, like this memorable aura that he's able to capture in his movies. And I think that's what makes him such an incredible supporting character actor that you just can't help but admire.
Yeah, I'm with you.
And yeah, I mean, especially with Titanic and Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
Very, very specific, memorable moments in both of those films.
I agree. He will be missed. Age of 79, I think he was. Should have had a few more years left in him, but yeah, rest in peace, Bernard Hill.
All right, Brendan, let's talk about stand-up comedy.
Oh, it's fun. It's fun. I wish we could do stand-up comedy. We're not as funny, though.
I'm not a very good comedian, clearly.
That's why we do podcasts. Yeah, that's why we do this, where we can actually, prep our thoughts and edit our thoughts to sound as good as possible. We're not as off the cuff as someone like Nikki Glaser.
Exactly. I cannot do what she does. Although I do think if I knew anyone that could do it, it would be Ryan McQuaid. I think he could be a great stand-up. He's very funny, can do the impersonations very well. I think he would nail it. But I'm clearly not one of those. I am no Nikki Glaser, that is for sure.
Yeah.
And she has a new special coming out, which is very exciting for those that like her stand-up. And the one thing I do appreciate about Nikki Glaser is that she is not afraid at all to say what is on her mind. And at times it is often very crass and uncouth.
Good for her.
Is what great stand-up, I guess, is supposed to be.
What we need more of. Lack of censorship for stand-up comedy.
Yeah, she's very, very good at that. I do love how, I guess, how in the weeds she could get at times. It's very, very funny. And she has a new hour-long special coming to Max this weekend. So Saturday, May 11th at 10 p.m. It is debuting on Max, and you're going to want to check it out. Especially if you're a fan of hers, get it on your radar now. It's really interesting how streaming has opened up a lot of these comedic spaces for like stand-up especially. That's one of my favorite things to do, honestly, on streaming.
I like that,
Netflix or Max, whatever it is. I do love watching a lot of these new specials.
Yeah, remember back in the day, you can only watch them when they aired them on Comedy Central?
Yeah, you'd have to catch it there or on HBO.
Yeah.
Because they'd
or
have
if it was like a tour, you had to go
specials.
see them live.
You had to go see them live.
Yeah.
Or catch them on the late night shows. Like for the longest time, that was it. Or like when I was in college and in high school, the big thing was listening to their CDs. You remember that?
Yeah.
That was such a big thing for like a good little while there.
Yeah, they had their own section at Best Buy and FYE and all those stores strictly for comedy, and you'd see, there's an Adam Sandler CD. There's a Dennis Leary CD.
Yeah, exactly.
You'd have albums from all these comedians there.
I feel like that's how Dane Cook got to be as big as he was.
That's the only reason why he came out at the right time.
Yeah, and it's because everyone listened to the audio.
Yeah,
like as the CD is like when that whole MP3 craze was such a new and big thing, and you had to get the Dane Cook album and you listened to it a bajillion times in your dorm room.
For us, it was our CD players during band practice in high school.
There you go. Yeah. Oh man, what a time! That was a long time ago. That's not how they do it now. It's all on streaming. It's available at your fingertips. It's all video, which is really great. At any rate, Nikki Glaser, new special coming out, debuting this Saturday, May 11th at 10 p.m. on Max. Go check it out, and we thank her for her support. All right, Brennan, let's talk about coffee. Oh, my goodness.
If only I was drinking coffee out of this giant thing right now, but sometimes I do. Sometimes I fill it with some coffee cult because it tastes great.
You got to love Coffee Cult. They source specialty grade coffee from all over the world. And what's really great about their coffee is that they're not just sourcing specialty grade, but they're sourcing the best of the best when it comes to that specialty grade coffee, because they want uniformity, because specialty grade coffee will come in these bags and sometimes, you'll see like little black beans in there, or you'll see ones with chips in them and things of that nature. Well, Coffee Cult has all of that filtered out. So you're getting pure grade A green coffee in every single batch. It's all uniform, and it's all specialty grade, and it's roasted with specific profiles to make each coffee distinct and unique, and just simply the best coffee that you can taste. And it's really fantastic. You have to check it out. And they have all different kinds of coffee, whether you like a dark roast or a super dark roast, or if you want something more of the medium variety. They have coffees that have notes of chocolate and nuts, or you have
All
coffees that
natural
are
flavors. Love it.
exactly
I love it. I love it.
coffees that are fruity and citrusy. They have those as well. Just depends on what you like.
And that's the
and
natural
what you need.
after effect you get from these proper beans. Like these are not added after the fact. This
exactly.
is what
all part of
it's all part of that process.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So
The Sumatra and the bourbon blend are probably my two favorites that I've had thus far.
well, and speaking of, for the bourbon lovers out there,
The
I'll
Derby.
just say, keep your ears and eyes peeled, because the bourbon barrel is going to be coming back soon. I don't think the information has been quite released yet, but soon it is coming out. And this bourbon barrel coffee, it is to die for.
You got me grinning.
If you're a bourbon fan, you're gonna love this coffee. It's just
I love
fantastic.
bourbon. I do.
So keep an eye out for that. But go check them out. That's coffeecult.com, coffee with a K, cult with a K, coffeecult.com. At checkout, use our code ISF and you'll get 15% off. Again, that code is ISF at checkout, coffeecult.com, and we thank them for their support. Okay, with that said, let's go ahead and transition to How Green Was My Valley?
Very green.
The next film in our Best Picture movie series. It is directed by John Ford. And it stars Walter Pidgeon, Maureen O'Hara, Donald Crisp, Anna Lee, Roddy McDowell, and a bunch of others that come and go throughout the film. If you're not familiar with How Green Was My Valley, at the turn of the century, in a Welsh mining village, the Morgans raise their coal mining sons and hope their youngest will find a better life. All right. Obviously, this film went on to win Best Picture for the films of 1941. Brendan, I believe you noted this was a first-time watch for you.
This is one of those John Ford films I sadly haven't had a chance to see. So it's interesting to see it now in context of it being one of his earlier films and how it compares to some of his, classics. I guess this does sort of fall into one of his classics in a way, given the reputation that it did win Best Picture. Also, given the reputation, and we're going to talk about the elephant in the room, I'm surprised you didn't lay out in the plot synopsis. If you're not familiar with How Green Was My Valley, it beat Citizen Kane for Best Picture.
It did beat Citizen Kane. Yes, it did.
Yeah.
I guess I didn't want to necessarily lay it out that way because I am going to talk about it in my opening thoughts. But
okay.
Yeah, it beat Citizen Kane and a few other really good films from that year. So maybe we can talk about that near the end if we want to talk about the competition of it all.
Sure.
But I would kind of rather talk about the movie on its own terms first, especially given the last segment. Before we got into this,
of course we're going to be as objective here as possible and talk about the film as a film and not what it competed against. And it was interesting going into this movie for the first time, since this was a first time watch for me, thinking, is this movie's worst offense that it beat a better movie for Best Picture? Like, is that the worst thing about it? And I was genuinely curious if the movie was going to, still work as its own thing rather than have that sort of looming history over top of it, right?
Yep.
And I guess we'll start there. We'll start with the movie itself, and given that this was a first time watch for me, how I felt about it. I was disappointed. I was disappointed in the film, and I say that with a lot of sadness, really, because I still think this is a good movie, but the groundwork was there. A nostalgic trip down memory lane, coming of age kind of tale. This movie was tailor-made for Brendan Cassidy. This is a movie tailor-made for me. It is so up my alley. And for the first, maybe 30 minutes, I thought this was great. I was really enjoying it. I loved its conceit. The use of voiceover narration I thought was really clever for a while, because I actually love the like the almost unofficial, unreliable narrator of it all, that this was basically a memory lane more than anything else. It was a now older man looking back on his childhood in different segments. The movie kind of feels like vignettes because they're different memories. The problem I have with the movie is that it's not that it doesn't do a good job sustaining itself. I think, if anything, my issue is I don't think it fully commits to what it sets itself up as. I think it has this really clever and tender and warm idea, but as it goes, it just starts to spin its wheels as a basic movie. And I don't think it fully commits to making Huel, played by a really young Rodney McDowall, really the cipher here. He is meant to be the cipher in all of this, and I think that sets the movie up very well in that regard. But I feel like it abandons that for different things, and I don't think that's intentional. I think, if anything, this is a movie that gets sort of lost in the usual trappings of a Hollywood epic of this time. And that's unfortunate, because I think the setup is great. I love the story. I love the idea. I love the nostalgia of it all. I think the movie looks beautiful. I think John Ford directs the hell out of it. So there's a lot of great things there, performatively, visually, musically. I love the vibe of it all. It just, narratively, I don't want to say the movie's tedious. Like I said, I just don't think it commits to itself to really justify the great idea that it set itself up as. And I think it starts to lose steam because of that, and just really it loses the dramatic weight when we see great moments between family members and pivotal emotional arcs conclude, and in literally seconds into the next scene, they're completely forgotten about. And I get that could be kind of the memory-like aspect of it, but the movie loses that sense of time because it doesn't commit to Huel as our cipher. And I found that really unfortunate. So I wanted to love it more than I did, because I love the idea. It's the kind of movie that's tailor-made for me. I just think it loses its way as it goes along.
Yeah, I'm with you. I don't love this film either. Sadly, I do think it's a weak Best Picture winner. Now, as I get into my thoughts, I do want to be transparent here, because I don't want to fall victim of stop turning art into sports. And I think it's quite easy to do so, since it's competing against some all-time heavy hitters, as you noted, Citizen Kane, The Maltese Falcon as well.
Great movie.
Do I understand why people have an issue with How Green Was My Valley or a CODA winning when there are very clearly better films that deserve the Oscar? I do. I really do. I talked about that in the CODA segment earlier in the show. However, there is a big distinction between How Green Was My Valley and something like CODA, and that CODA, as I argued, I do think is a very good movie still. That's why the turning art into sports thing is so frustrating, because that is a film still worth celebrating and loving. How Green Was My Valley is not quite that. Even if its intentions are affable, I do think this is a film that has its heart in the right place.
Absolutely.
It's classic Hollywood storytelling. It has characters we like and root for. It's emotional at times. The problem is that it has no identity. It is 5 movies in one. On one hand, it's about unionization and working class politics. It's also a movie about religion and the handcuffs it puts on relationships. It's a movie about grief and loss. It's a poignant coming of age story. And weirdly, at times, it acts as a comedy. The boxing scene with the school teacher has no place here, but it is genuinely hilarious in a vacuum.
Sure.
It has no idea. This film has no idea what it wants to be. It has a major identity crisis, and it pinballs from one through line to the next without any precision or purpose whatsoever. It's really hard to invest in these characters and the drama here when it bounces around aimlessly the way it does, even if each through line is compelling on its own terms.
Yeah.
Maybe the biggest difference between you and I, because you talked about that as well in your opening thoughts, I don't always love the craft to this film.
Interesting.
The cinematography which won the Oscar for Best Cinematography, I think is fine. There are a few well-staged shots, but I don't think it's anything extraordinary, especially when you, and I don't always love to do this because it veers dangerously close to the whole sports thing. However, I don't think comparison is always a bad thing. And there are other movies in that year, in 1941, from a cinematography standpoint, that are truly astounding, incredible.
And certainly more experimental as well.
Absolutely. I mean, last week we talked about Rebecca. Obviously, that came out a year earlier. From a cinematography and editing perspective, that blows this.
That's a
film
better
out
movie.
of the water.
Yeah.
So I don't think the cinematography is anything extraordinary. I don't think it's bad. I just don't find it anything of note.
I think
it's not noteworthy.
I think the exterior shots are pretty special.
There are a few. Again, there are a few well-staged shots. I agree.
Yeah.
I will give you that. But on the whole, I think it's pretty standard filmmaking. But more than that, the acting here, I think, is a bit spotty as well. Like, I don't love a lot of these performances. And I think it comes down to maybe not the actors themselves.
That's what I was going to say.
But
I don't think
more
it's their
so
fault.
the identity crisis of this film. Because you have some of these performers acting, literally, as if they're in this working class politics movie.
Yeah.
Then there's the movie about comedy, this film acting as a comedy at times. And these, there are at least 2 or 3 performances here that are heightened to an insane degree. Like really over the top.
Thankfully, some of them are not in the movie all that much.
They're not, thankfully. But when you couple that with how grounded this film is, like you think about the priest character and how that couples with one of the daughters here.
Angarad, I believe.
Angarad?
I can't pronounce any of these names as we talk about. They're Welsh,
challenging.
but Maureen O'Hara as that sister you're talking about. I think she's definitely one of the high points.
She's great. No, I agree. Maureen O'Hara is fantastic. But what a contrast between her performance or even Roddy McDowall here and some of these heightened supporting characters that almost come off buffoonery. Like they're from a Charlie Chaplin movie. Except
Like the boxers that
yes,
that
very
pick
much
a fight
like
with the
that scene.
teacher. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah,
Like,
that was an interesting scene.
Exactly. Like the contrasting tones here are crazy to me at times. So like it might be less on the performers and what they're tasked to do here.
I think so.
But either way, the performances are inconsistent. The sound design, it's 1941. Obviously, we can't expect it to be what it is today. But I think even by 1941 standards, it's a little choppy at times for me. So like, I just think from a craft perspective, John Ford, who I love, he's made some incredible all-time films for sure. This was clearly him before John Ford became who he was, I think.
Well, he had
And-
Stagecoach under his belt before this too, so it's not like he was incapable.
Which is
of making
incredible,
movies.
but like those 2 films are so wildly different.
That's fair. That's fair.
You know what I mean? And I'm not, I guess, up to date in terms of the context of, you know, why he chose this coming off the heels of Stagecoach a few years earlier. Is this the next one? Because Stagecoach was 39. I imagine this
there may have at least been
close.
one movie. Yeah, there may have at least been one movie in between them, but they are at least very close in proximity.
They're very, very close. And Stagecoach is great. Like,
Yeah, that's a great movie.
a stunning film. And that's maybe another one. I didn't even think about that in terms of comparison here because I'm thinking about 1941 and these other Best Picture contenders here, at least of those that I've seen. But even Stagecoach, man, that is an immaculately directed movie.
I agree.
And
I agree.
this feels so inferior to that, in my opinion.
At times, it does feel kind of distant. Technically, now like I said, there are some great exterior shots where you can tell the John Ford that we've come to know is there, and I think emotionally he is going for something that we've seen him do before. There are moments here where it's clear John Ford was always someone that Spielberg admired, right? Like you could definitely sense that early influence in even a movie like How Green Was My Valley, and I don't disagree with what you're talking about as far as the film having these massive inconsistencies. The movie is very consistent, but a movie like this, especially a coming of age film, we've seen movies that are kind of inconsistent in a way still work. A movie like Boyhood, for instance, is a movie that functions as a series of vignettes mostly. It has a meandering kind of pace to it, but each moment of that child's life has its own story to tell, right? Its own kind of sliver, its own kind of chapter. We've seen that work before. So why is it sort of lacking in this movie? And I think it does come down to that lack of commitment to its early stages of establishing a cipher, establishing a centralized figure to guide us through all of these things. And like I said, I really like the way it started, but then there are moments where it completely abandons that for really dramatic scenes between, again, going to mispronounce these names completely. Angarod, who is played by Maureen O'Hara, we mentioned her earlier, and the preacher, Mr. Grufford, played by Walter Pidgeon. They have a bit of a romantic kindling of sorts, but they have scenes together where Hugh, Roddy McDowall's character, isn't even present. It's like, oh, how are you reminiscing about these things? Like that level of detail and the specificity of that just makes it feel like it's not committing to its conceit. And then when Hugh is then taken to school and he has his own journey at school being picked on by both the teacher and the students, it becomes a completely different movie in that regard. But it's like, okay, now we're finally we're starting to commit to what you pre-established, but you're already too late. And that's the thing. It lacks a cipher to guide us through all this. That through line is just missing, unfortunately.
No, I completely agree. And before I respond to that, I quickly want to note, because we have to remember early Hollywood, they made a bajillion movies a year.
They did, yeah.
So John Ford makes Stagecoach in 1939. He made 5 other movies in that time frame from 39 to 41, including,
of course,
and we should have noted this, The Grapes of Wrath, which
we
talked about briefly last week as well. So, and The Long Voyage Home, I think, is noteworthy in this as well.
The Grapes of Wrath, For some reason, I thought that was 42, but you're right. That is 1940. That
is 1940.
That might be top 3 John Ford for me.
It's really great.
I love that one.
Yeah, it's very good. And there's a few other films in there as well from 1939 to 41.
Okay.
So How Green Was My Valley is, I guess, early-ish John, although he had made a bajillion films, honestly, before How Green Was My Valley, and obviously made a ton more afterwards. It's actually like kind of more in the middle of his career. However, that is to say, of all the John Ford films I've seen, I just feel like this is so distant from his ethos in terms of filmmaking or craft. And maybe it's because of the screenplay, so much of what happens here is on the interior, and I don't know how extravagant you're going to get in a mining village. It's supposed to be a little basic in that regard. I'm not saying that the cinematography is bad. I think it is kind of limited because of the setting and the time and place in which this story takes place. There are a few establishing shots, as you noted earlier, that are quite great, but it does feel very distant from John Ford in that regard. So
it's not as adventurous, which is not a bad thing. Like, I like the change of pace, and he's certainly maybe trying to challenge himself. Maybe we can assume or hypothesize that he's trying to challenge himself and do something a little bit different.
Yes, because it is very different from his notable works, for sure.
Right.
I agree. So I at least wanted to set that context there because
Right,
I don't think I articulated that well previously.
Mm-hmm.
To your point about the screenplay and the storytelling here, that is really my biggest problem here is the jarring shifts in this film where we see those early scenes with the sons and them standing up against the corporate politics that's taking place and how that's counterintuitive to their father, who has, I guess, a somewhat prominent managerial type position at this mining company. He doesn't want to strike, but his sons do. That I do find very compelling. Like there's an interesting political angle to the film, and then it just suddenly shifts into something completely different. And it starts being this movie about religion and the daughter. And honestly, as jarring as a shift as it is, I do, in a vacuum, also admire the religious subtext of this film.
I think
especially at the time.
Yeah, there are notions here that are pretty ahead of its time. I think
Very ahead of its
there,
time.
There are some
Absolutely.
forward-thinking things here. I have to give the movie credit on that.
I agree.
on that.
Like, on its own terms, those sequences here are incredible because this film, and you got to think 1940s, the country was still, I mean, if we want to dub the United States a Christian nation now, and I don't know if we can at this point, but it very much was in 1940. And this is a film that you could almost call anti-religious, which
is a broad statement.
Interesting irony. I mean, not
bold
just
statement rather.
Yeah. And you think about the religiosity of the setting in which this takes place as well. You know, it's not that the United States has a monopoly on religion. It obviously very much does not.
Right.
But, you know, us living here in the States, it's interesting to think about this film coming out and it having this anti-religious ethos to it, and yet it wins Best Picture. Like, that's incredible to me. Like, that's...
Well, maybe that was part of it. You know, we have seen movies win coveted awards because they had a boldness to them. And maybe there was a more immediately recognized boldness to this one as opposed to something like Citizen Kane, which was really bold, not just emotionally and dramatically, but from the filmmaking side of things was very experimental and very new. And that's a movie that perhaps just took a little bit more time for Hollywood and us as viewers to recognize as being very bold and forward thinking in the right ways. But it's easy to see a film like this at the time and think, and again, I say at the time, I was not alive in 1940, so I can't speak to it in that way, but I can only assume that seeing something that says religion is bad for a Hollywood movie like this, you can immediately recognize that as being bold and daring. And maybe that was part of the push that allowed a film like this to win Best Picture. Because I love that notion, and I love the capitalistic mindset that also supports the film. I think those are some great themes in and of themselves. Again, it's just that single cipher that's trying to tie these things together that I think it is sorely missing. I think it needed to commit to one of two things in order to be successful. It either needed to maintain that sort of fragmented narrative propulsion that you're talking about, but really keep young Hugh, front and center, because memories can be very fragmented. That's probably the point of the movie. It's meant to feel fragmented because memories can be like that. They can almost feel jarring when you look back at certain things simultaneously. But then Hugh should have been more front and center to commit to that. So if they're not going to do that, then just tell a basic story from beginning to end. Don't worry about the nostalgia of it all. Like, keep it a bit more practical in that way. And I feel like it's a film that tries to do both, and it doesn't succeed in that balancing act.
Well, I agree. I feel like the best movies that employ that tactic are about memories and their fragmentation have this ethereal filmmaking quality to it.
Yeah.
And as an experience, you feel the film seamlessly shifting from one memory to the next.
Yeah.
Whereas, as I noted in my opening thoughts, this is classic Hollywood storytelling.
Yeah.
And I think that's why that boldness as it relates to the religiosity of this film might come off as bold, but it still feels familiar because the structure and storytelling of this film is pretty conventional.
This movie needed a little bit more Charlie Kaufman.
It needed a lot more Charlie Kaufman. I agree. Absolutely. So you think of Kaufman or Bergman, like some of these filmmakers, Tarkovsky, that are really great at channeling memories in this opaque, transcendental, vague way where it feels like you're floating through space and time.
But still feel kind of nostalgic and tender and loving and inviting. Actually, Malick would be great for this kind of material. He really would be.
He would love this material.
Yeah.
He could really take, especially being a religious guy himself, could do this film a lot of good. Like his take on this story, I think would be fascinating.
In a way, I feel like I think in a way he almost kind of has done this movie before. Like there are sprinkles of Malick. You can notice this movie in various portions of his filmography. And I don't know if that's official or not, if he was ever influenced by this movie. But I could really see this falling into his wheelhouse. And we have to be careful because I don't want this to come off as saying that we don't like this movie because it wasn't the movie that we wanted or the movie that we think it should have been. If anything, I think the problem with this movie is that it promises something that it just doesn't deliver on. And I think that's the biggest thing here.
Well, I agree that you don't want to talk about what you want out of this film, but I do think it's fair to articulate why the film doesn't work because it's structured conventionally when the promise of it, as you're talking about, relies on this fragmentation, but you can't render cinematically fragmentation through these very jolting hard edits. Like it makes for a very jarring experience that is ultimately very underwhelming because we're very quickly shifting from one tone to the next, from one narrative point to the next, and there's really not much to really cement them together, which is why it's just weird when you go from a scene about grief and loss and in the next moment Hugh is in school and he's beaten up by the teacher, and then the next thing you know it's a Chaplin movie in the middle of this poignant film about working class politics. It's
like, what's the thing that's like creating this jarring memory stream, right? Like, is there a moment in the present day? You know, I think it's like a 50-year-old Hugh who's narrating this. I forget the actual age that he calls himself. And first off, I love that we don't see adult Hugh in this. I love that that's kept at a distance, kind of maintaining that promise that this could be a bit more fragmented in its memory, in its memory stream, if you want to call it that. But I think we need some type of I guess motivation that leads him to think about a memory in a certain way. So is something happening in the present day that then makes him look back on that fight with his teacher in a Chaplin-like way? You know, like what changes for him? And there are times I've even forgotten that there were voiceover narrators in this movie. It gets to a point it just completely abandons that. And I like the way it sets that up. I actually think this movie could have gotten the voiceover thing pretty right.
And here's,
I don't know.
I agree with you. The unseen narrator, I think, is an interesting tactic.
Yeah.
But again, going back to the basis of this conversation and the idea that it's 5 movies in one, there's a massive contradiction there.
Yeah.
Because if this is supposed to be from the perspective of Hugh, how on earth does he have any context to a lot of the things we see here that are not from his point of view?
Well,
like not even close.
That's the thing. Because on one hand, I could buy into the fact that, okay, as a literal man now, he knows what was happening and he can look back on it with that context and the education that he has formed over the years. The problem is that many of these things that he's telling us about, he's not even in the scene for. So it's
exactly.
like he wasn't even present for for these moments, and that's the inconsistency there.
Exactly. And that's what makes the experience all the more jarring. Now, if the film provided that context, if we went back and forth between these, you know, these memory montages and how that correlates to him in his present time, in his present future, then okay, I can understand how the film could make that correlation, because that context makes sense of what we're seeing on screen. But we don't know. We have no idea. The present Hugh is completely unknown to us. All we know is that he's an adult and he's looking back at his childhood. Yeah. That's it. And the movie that's feels not enough to make sense of that lack of context.
Yeah, it just feels incomplete. The more I think about it, again, I don't know if this was the movie that was intended, if the final product is what John Ford and screenplay writers were hoping for, but it really does feel like there are gaps here. And it got to the midpoint where I started to realize I'm missing something. I love the setup. I love how it was promising itself as something, and for a while, I loved how it was kind of unfolding like a storybook. For a while, the only words that we can actually hear was adult Hugh narrating this thing. Very rarely you would actually hear characters in the movie, in the story he's telling us. Very rarely do you even hear them speak. You'd see them speak, but you didn't actually hear anything from them. And I actually thought that was a really clever touch. I could have seen a whole movie like that. I thought that's a really interesting idea. And that could have been that cipher that brings us in and adds some connectivity here. But it abandons that and then just becomes a movie, for lack of a better term.
And honestly, like, the more we talk about it, and I don't want to keep beating a dead horse, because these sudden narrative shifts, I think, are woefully executed here. Like, they're just not interwoven very well. But I think what makes it disappointing is that there is something bold about this film. Like, it has a backbone that I deeply admire. I really do. You know, because, you know, we talked about the religiosity of the film, but even as it relates to Hugh, like, there's a scene here where he is injured and the stakes are he may never walk again. This is a film that's not afraid to put its central characters in peril, especially a young child. And even after he recovers from that, we noted the scene earlier about him getting his rear end completely annihilated from his teacher, which sounds awful to say. Like, my phrasing there was terrible, but you understand what I mean. Like, he just gets absolutely destroyed by his teacher. You know, it's not afraid to show that to us physically, which is what makes the boxing scene, you know, I guess a little satisfying to see him get a little bit of revenge there. Again, to me, it's the tone of it, because it's so comedically driven, and it plays like a true comedy. Which is
and now we should be
so
clear.
weird.
The boxing scene we're talking about is the moment between the adults from the Welsh community that they're from and the teacher in the classroom. Because the boxing scene before that between Hugh and the bully is actually a very good scene. But it's also representative of my problem with the movie in totality, because you have this great moment of catharsis against a bully, and in doing so, he actually earns that respect. He has to get whipped for it. He has to put the guard to bite down on, and even his bully is saying to him, "Bite down harder. You got this." Essentially,
but
that's a great moment.
Yeah,
but that's great setup for something else to come between the two of them that we never get.
Exactly.
Yeah, so
it never goes through on that.
Like,
I
that
agree.
scene right there is a perfect representation of everything that we're talking about. That's good and problematic about this movie.
I agree. I feel the same way about, again, I'm not sure how to pronounce her name, Angerard. And the priest character. Like, there's some great setup that the film doesn't really fall through on. We do get that final moment where the priest talks about why they can't be together. So there's at least some closure, but I also feel like there's a lot left on the table as far as what that whole through line could have been here. Like,
Yeah.
you know, we talked earlier about the boldness of that being in the film, but it's also like maybe 15% of this movie. Like
Everything's
it's such a
15% of this
small-
movie.
And that's the thing. Like, there's great elements here, but it's ultimately a small part because it's 5 movies in one, and it's trying to follow through on its promise of being 5 movies in one.
Yeah.
And so a lot of these things suffer, but there are those bold, great moments. And, you know, another one I think of is the ending to this film, which it ends on this moment of devastation and heartbreak. And I admire that the film is willing to go there. I don't know if it's as affecting as it could have been because the characterization is muted ultimately. But I think it does work because of, to be fair to John Ford, the staging of that moment and the performances are really good there.
Yeah.
So like, as far as making those final moments come together, like, yeah, there's a dolefulness to this film that I do admire and appreciate. I just wish there was more structure to its fragmented mindset.
It needed something to connect those fragments, and that's what's missing here. And that's so unfortunate because I said in my opening thoughts, this is the kind of movie that's tailor made for me. I am emotionally susceptible to movies like this, coming of age tales that are nostalgic trips down memory lane about your hometown. It's why I love a movie like Stand By Me so much, one of my all-time favorite movies. This has a similar ethos to it, and it's just missing something as we keep talking about. Weirdly, you know, the movie I was most reminded of while watching this, it's a movie that tonally is completely different, but I think narratively shares a lot in common. Have you ever seen Spike Lee's Crooklyn?
Yeah, a long time ago.
There's a lot narratively similar between that movie and this one, even right down to its tragic ending. But again, that's a movie that kind of meanders. Crooklyn specifically, it's very loose. It sometimes shifts perspectives. It's not in a more natural setting like in Wales, obviously, but it does treat its setting like a character. It does have a very defined sense of place. But it is a movie that I think takes a similar approach and actually does it successfully. So a movie like this could work. The fragmentation itself is not the problem. It's the gaps that are not tying those fragments together that's sorely missing here. And I needed more of that. I really did.
I agree. I sadly I don't love the movie, not because it won Best Picture. Again, to be crystal effing clear on that. It has nothing to do with it winning Best Picture. It has everything to do with the execution on its own terms.
I'm
and that to me is the difference.
Yeah.
And why I think it's, you know, saddening that it won Best Picture. Now, I know there are fans of this, that people do really like it, and I'm glad that people do like it, but
I've noticed that too. Yeah.
Yeah, when it comes to 1941, though, there are several movies here that I much, much prefer to How Green Was My Valley, including Kane, obviously, The Maltese Falcon.
Love that film.
What do you think of Hitchcock's Suspicion in relation to this conversation? Have you seen that one?
A long time ago, and I remember being rather underwhelmed by it.
Yeah.
I'd have to revisit that one, but that's college Brendan who saw that one. So
it's hard to say like how you feel about it now.
I say that kind of facetiously, but I also don't. That was a very different person.
Of course.
Yeah. But I do remember being pretty underwhelmed by it.
Yeah.
I saw it around the same time I saw Rebecca for the first time, and I remember loving Rebecca a lot more. And I still really like Rebecca, even despite the conversation that we had, but I remember preferring Rebecca.
Yeah. I don't love Suspicion either. Again, haven't seen it in years.
Yeah.
So it's hard to say how differently I would respond now. But I feel like How Green Was My Valley is kind of more on that level than some of these others that are listed here.
Yeah, because I really like Citizen Kane as much as everyone else probably does. And The Maltese Falcon, that's a great movie.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Have you seen any of these others nominated here?
I have to pull up the list. You might want to start just saying
Sergeant York.
Haven't seen it.
The Howard Hawks film. Honestly,
No.
I think I saw that in college too. But I don't know. That was I'm old, Brendan. That was a long time ago.
Yeah, you're 72.
Yeah, well, that was 20 years ago for me. Oh my God.
Yeah, I'm pulling up the list right now. But yeah, of course, Maltese Falcon. That's a great movie. Haven't seen The Little Foxes. Haven't seen. Oh, I think I've seen One Foot in Heaven. Actually, I got to think about that. That may have been another college film for me.
Yeah. Kane and Falcon, though, at the very least, that's my 1-2 punch. I know, hot take to say that.
Yeah, well, I mean,
some of these others, though, I'd
yeah.
love to catch up with some of these. I sadly ran out of time. I really wanted to try to catch up with a few more of these, but
same here. Yeah, sadly, with this Best Picture series that we're doing, you can't do all of the homework for comparison's sake.
No.
It's just that's an impossible feat, and we haven't seen all of these.
Yeah, it'll be a little bit easier when the homework reduces from 10 to 5.
Yeah,
especially because in a lot of these years, I've already seen, a bunch of these movies anyway.
Yeah,
so.
Or when we get to another decade later on down the road, we've already seen those movies because they're just engraved in pop culture, right?
Yeah.
So sometimes the homework's already
I'm just
there.
looking at 1950, for example, All About Eve, I've seen. Father of the Bride, I've seen. Sunset Boulevard, I've seen. I'd have to make time for 2 other movies.
That's more doable.
A little bit more doable. Yeah,
Sure,
absolutely.
Sure. Yeah.
So, but right now we're rocking with 10 nominees. I just don't have time
some
to
of
watch
them,
all 10
some
in a
of
week.
them who've kind of faded with time, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So there's
exactly.
that too.
But at any rate, I just there are things I like about How Green Was My Valley. I don't love it. I don't love it.
I still like it overall because I like what it's going for, and
I don't think it's not the worst thing I've ever seen.
No, but
it's
even,
not.
Yeah, I've seen movies in this sort of genre or category, if you want to call it that I don't think are necessarily good movies, and yet they still move me in some way. Like I said, I'm emotionally susceptible to these kind of movies.
Sure.
And they're going to work for me in some way. This one, it still does. Like there are scenes here I'm going to rewatch. There is a rewatchability to aspects of this movie. There really is. And there is a charming and tender quality to it that I really do like. I just don't. I think it's one of those cases where the movie as a whole is what less than the sum of its parts. I guess that's how you say it. That's what this is to me.
Yeah. And look, if you love this film and you tweet about it, I promise you I'm not going to be in your mentions ruining your party.
Citizen Kane.
Citizen Kane. Like, it might inspire me
dare
to
you
have
knock my beloved Rosebud.
It might inspire me to create my own tweet separate from yours, but that's it.
Oh, a subtweet?
Yeah. Well, it's I mean, again, because I'm not tweeting at that person.
Right,
I'm just taking inspiration from the idea.
Sure.
And that's different.
That is very different. That's a fair point.
fine.
Yeah.
Or if you want to have a one-on-one conversation about it, I'm willing to have that as well. But I don't want to jump into someone's mentions and just ruin their day. Your take is awful. Goodbye. Like, okay. I mean,
to be fair, I'm not saying Brian is one of these people who we talked about earlier, but some people who make those claims are looking for those kind of comments, and you're making their day by actually commenting.
Oh, for sure.
In the first place. Yeah.
And that's the difference with Brian.
Yeah.
And those that don't know him, maybe they could see it as that. I promise you, Brian comes from a sincere and earnest place. He
Absolutely.
is not.
He's not that person.
Bait clicking at all.
No.
Like, this is he's not trying to bait you. This isn't Tom Hardy, Mad Max, Fury Road.
No,
that's not at all what he's doing. I promise you that.
Oh, that'd be something.
Yeah. At any rate, if you agree or disagree with anything we had to say here, if you're watching on YouTube, leave a comment below. If you're listening to us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, however you listen, you can reach out to us on social media.
Yeah.
Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Letterboxd. We would love to know how you feel about How Green Was My Valley.
Yeah.
We are 2 movies down in this series.
Mm-hmm.
And I look forward to getting to the rest of them.
Yeah. Yeah.
A
lot of interesting ones on the horizon.
Yes. As we wind down here, though, I do want to take a quick note here to plug reviews. We have a couple of podcast reviews from last week where we talked about challengers. And oh my God, what a conversation that ended up being. Brendan and I at each other's throats like it is a tennis match. It was unbelievable.
All you need to do is add Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross's score in the background, and you have Challengers Part 2.
We certainly went at it with Challengers, and that was a really fun conversation. If you want to go and check that out.
Yeah.
We also had a review of Late Night with the Devil, which was a really fun conversation as well.
Good movie.
This week, we are, of course, talking The Fall Guy.
Yep.
We'll get into that, as well as the romantic comedy, The Idea of You, out now on Amazon Prime. So we'll get into those 2 movies.
Yep.
Our latest Women in Session episode is up, where Jalen and Kristen talk about Guy Pearce. Again, shocker, if you know them. They talked about underrated Guy Pearce movies this time.
Okay.
So go and check that out. There's a new Chasing the Gold episode. Last week, Erica and Shadon talked about Zendaya with the year she's having with Dune and Challengers. They talk about her and those 2 movies.
Yep.
This week, I believe they are talking about The Fall Guy and The Idea of You as well. So I'm not sure how they're funneling that conversation quite yet. I haven't edited that show, but I believe that is the idea that they're going with this week.
Okay.
So go and check out all of that. Again, follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We would love to interact with you on those platforms. Letterboxd. You can always email us InSessionFilm@gmail.com. Rate and review us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Really helps out the show. If you're watching on YouTube, subscribe to the channel. Like the video, comment, all that fun stuff really helps us out.
Absolutely.
Brendan, do you have any final thoughts as we get out of here this week?
Enjoy my background while it lasts, as we'll be moving out of this apartment. My wife and I moving out pretty soon, so it might look a little spotty next time, and then it'll be in a completely new, less adventurous setting for a few months. Man, for those who are listening who do live in eastern Pennsylvania, especially close to Philly, if you can agree with how bad the housing market is here right now, the housing market's terrible. We're struggling. We're struggling.
No, I hear you. It's really bad in South Florida as well.
Is it really?
I'm glad that we lucked out at the right time, especially. We were
You
able
secured
to
it
get a
when
house.
you could. Yeah,
We
good
secured
stuff.
it when we could. Right now, though, it is impossible, and it's extremely expensive. Like, it's extraordinarily expensive. It's crazy. Like, if we were to put our house on the market right now, we could almost double what we paid for it. It's stupid.
It's stupid. But here's the thing. If you were to do that and try to make some money back on that, there's no inventory to find something new.
No, exactly. That's why we can't sell it. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah.
No, we'd have to move back to Michigan, where land is a little bit cheaper, and just build one from scratch. Yeah. Is how we'd have to do that.
Yeah. New construction, baby.
That'd be the cheaper option there. No, it's wild. So hopefully you guys are able to find something, because it is a crazy time for sure.
We'll be finding ourselves in the driver's seat for at least a little while throughout the summer. So it's going to work out. We firmly believe these things happen for a reason. Any roadblocks we go through, it's something to overcome, and we'll get there. Yeah.
So if Brendan does a show from his car, that's how it's got to be.
I am officially homeless.
Absolutely.
I would actually on that note, how cool would it be if my wife and I just buy an RV? And we
Just
travel the open
Okay,
road, and that's where I do my
There's no
podcast
excuse
from.
for you to not come to South Florida. Then you have.
Oh,
to
we'll
be
make the
here.
trip. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
Of course. Well, then we'll go to San Francisco. We'll go to Colorado. We'll
Go everywhere. Yeah. Absolutely. I would love that. As my last final thought here, real quick, we didn't really have time to get into this earlier, but there was a report earlier this week that there's a new movie coming out called Flesh of the Gods from the same director that did Mandy. Oh, what a lovely movie. It stars
Mandy.
Kristen Stewart and Oscar Isaac, and it's a vampire thriller. Oh, my God.
So basically,
Automatic. Most anticipated movie.
basically the greatest movie ever made is what this is going to be.
Oh my God.
This
I
is going to
cannot
beat
wait.
Citizen Kane. This is going to beat Citizen Kane.
Yeah, it's the Citizen Kane of most anticipated movies. There's no doubt
It's
about
going to be
that.
the Citizen Kane of vampire movies.
I can't wait. Cannot wait. With all of that said, thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on the InSession Film Podcast. Oh, man. How green was my valley?
Citizen
No
Kane still
Citizen
rules.
Kane.